Good morning. Today's presentation is obstructive sleep apnea, and my moderator is Dr. Supriya Ram. Obstructive sleep apnea is a chronic sleep-concerned breathing disorder that is characterized by periodic narrowing and obstruction of the pharyngeal airway during sleep. Majority of people with the OSA snore loudly and frequently, with the periods of pause when airflow is reduced or blocked. They then have choking, snorting, or gasping sounds when their airway resumes during sleep, causing soft tissue in the back of the throat to collapse and obstruct the upper airway. The prevalence of OSA is 4% in men and 2% in women among the middle-aged population. As age increases, the prevalence also increases, and it is estimated about 28 to 67% for the elderly men and 20 to 54% for the elderly women. Untreated OSA is associated with long-term health consequences such as cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, cognitive impairment, and depression. Coming to symptoms, symptoms of OSA include chronic loud snoring, excessive daytime sleepiness, fatigue, non-refreshing sleep, nocturia, morning headache, irritability, and memory loss, gasping or choking episodes during sleep, obesity, especially nuchal obesity, that is around the neck, neck size more than 17 inches in males and 16 inches in females, and also associated with lost productivity and in the workplace and motor vehicle accidents resulting in injury and fatality. The signs to identify patients at risk of apnea include increased daytime sleepiness, that is, it can be drowsy driving, automobile or work-related accidents due to fatigue, personality changes or cognitive difficulties related to fatigue, hypertension, nasopharyngeal narrowing, and pulmonary hypertension, which is rare. Most people with OSA are undiagnosed and untreated. In some, it is due to lack of awareness of the disorder, and others refuse to seek because of stigma related to some features like snoring, access to polysomnography, that is sleep study, and diagnostic services. Given the burden of the disease and shortcomings of existing diagnostic and treatment approaches and substantial health, safety, and economic consequences of untreated OSA, there should be a need to continue to raise the awareness and develop new strategies to manage this condition. Coming to pathophysiology of obstructive sleep apnea, OSA can develop due to multiple contributors. The major factors that play a potential role in the development of OSA are decrease in the forces of pharyngeal dilators, the negative inspiratory pressures generated by the diaphragm, and the improper upper airway anatomy, the element most effectively addressed by surgery. In recent years, the potential role that factors beyond pharyngeal anatomy and craniofacial structure play in OSA has also been recognized, so which we'll see further. The common sites of obstruction are located in pharynx. Airway failure often occurs when patients sleep on their back and the base of the tongue adheres to the posterior pharyngeal wall and soft palate. Elongated or excessive tissue of the soft palate, large tongue, swollen uvula, large tonsils, and redundant pharyngeal mucosa, they are the most common reasons of snoring in OSA. The causes of OSA are roughly divided into two things, that is anatomical and neuromuscular. Non-anatomical or neuromuscular contributors are impaired pharyngeal dilator, muscle function, premature awakening due to mild airway narrowing, which means the patient has a low respiratory arousal threshold, and unstable control of breathing. The upper airway can collapse at one or multiple sites. The pharyngeal or anatomical structures that can contribute to airway crowding and collapse include the dilator muscles such as genioglossus, soft palate, lateral pharyngeal walls, and the epiglottis. So craniofacial morphology, position of the hyoid bone, airway surface tension, tongue scalloping, and tongue fat are some of the factors associated with OSA risk and severity. The upper airway obstruction is essential in the pathogenesis of OSA. It has been shown that OSA is largely absent in those individuals without an inherently collapsible upper airway on a structural basis. So there is something called as critical pressure, which we'll see further, and when that critical pressure exceeds -5 centimeters of water, the risk of OSA markedly increases. The appearance of OSA features parallels the rise of critical pressure, increasing from simple snoring to cyclical hypopnea and then fully to occlusive apneas. So there is a graded causal relationship, and these features are recapitulated in normal persons when upper airway obstruction is induced, and they are abolished in OSA patients when airway patency is restored. Therefore, upper airway obstruction alone constitutes both a necessary and sufficient condition for the development of OSA, and once the airway has collapsed, several factors modify the response to the airway obstruction and affects the ultimate expression of sleep disordered breathing. Neuromuscular responses preserve the ventilation and protect against the development of OSA, and if the neuromuscular compensatory mechanisms are also insufficient for a given structural load, then the ventilatory demand and the ventilation dissociate, and there is a repeated sleep disordered breathing events. This is the structure which shows the airway, which is divided into the upstream segment, which includes the nasal cavity, the nasopharynx, which are surrounded by rigid structures like bony structures, and downstream segment, which includes the larynx and trachea, again surrounded by rigid structures. And the middle segment is the collapsible segment, which is the pharynx and the oropharynx, because they're surrounded by soft tissues and they are easily collapsible. So as you can see here, when the air moves in the upstream segment, it moves with a certain pressure, which we call pressure of the upstream segment, and again in the pressure of the downstream segment. But when the critical pressure, which is surrounding the collapsible segment, is greater than both these upper and lower segment pressures, then as you can see in figure B, there is complete collapse of the collapsible segment, and the patient experiences apnea, and that will produce severe type of OSA, that is a patient will have apnea episodes. So the type of OSA also will be severe. Whereas if the critical pressure is more than downstream segment, as in figure C, but it is less than the upstream segment, so there will be intermittent obstruction of the collapsible segment, and the patient will have snoring. So this will cause mild type of OSA. So patient can have episodes of hypoapnea and sometimes apnea. And as in D, when the critical pressure is lower than both upper and lower segments, then this is a normal airway. So there is no OSA. So what is the role of upper airway obstruction? So current evidence suggests that disturbances in this critical pressure plays a very primary role in OSA pathogenesis. So the role of this obstruction OSA pathogen can be considered as in light of Koch's postulates. Koch's postulate states that if there is a causative agent and there's a disease, and the causative agent causes the disease, then the causative agent should cause a disease, and when the causative agent is removed, the disease is also eliminated. So similarly, when here the causative agent is upper airway obstruction, and there is a causal relationship between OSA obstruction and the pathogenic factors that promote the OSA obstruction and the overt polysomnographic manifestation of disease like hypoapnea and apnea, which is measured by the AHI index, that is we'll see further. And when OSA obstruction is treated, there is elimination of OSA. So these principles require first and foremost the pathogenic factors causing upper airway collapse, which are associated with OSA. Elevations in critical pressure have been demonstrated in these patients compared to age, sex, BMI, matched controls under general anesthesia and neuromuscular blockade as well. So the critical pressure is different in different age, sex and BMI patients. Further strength for the association between upper airway obstruction and OSA is evidenced by studies demonstrating that critical pressure is both sensitive and specific. So nearly all people with OSA have a critical pressure greater than -5 centimeters of water, which indicates that upper airway collapsibility is both sensitive, it is a sensitive marker for OSA, and as the critical pressure progressively rises, there is the increase in the severity of OSA during sleep have also been observed clinically. Modest elevations in critical pressure are associated with snoring, and moderate elevations like the levels between -5 and 0 have been associated with sleep disordered breathing characterized by obstructive hypopneas. And with further increase, like if the critical pressure becomes positive, then periodic obstruction apneas are observed during sleep. Quantitative differences in critical pressure have therefore been associated with greater changes in the severity of airflow obstruction during sleep. Coming to determinants of upper airway collapsibility, elevations in critical pressures can be attributed to passive structural defects in the upper airways and disturbances in neuromuscular control. So what are the anatomic alterations? There are a variety of factors that lead to airway collapsibility, like various craniofacial features related to either skeletal morphology or pharyngeal soft tissue that may predispose to upper airway collapse. Mandibular size, maxillary height, high aortic position, they have been associated with the risk of OSA. Decreased velopharyngeal area and tonsillar hypertrophy are soft tissue features that have been associated with increased upper airway collapsibility. So in general, these anatomical variants are thought to increase critical pressure by restricting the size of the bony enclosure around the pharynx and or increasing the amount of soft tissue contained therein. So disturbances in neuromuscular control. So two-thirds of the variability in OSA severity is due to neuromuscular responses. OSA patients appear to be especially dependent on neuromuscular activity to maintain the airway patency and ventilation during sleep. This activity varies markedly with reduction in pharyngeal dilated tone at sleep onset that predisposes to airway obstruction. The reductions in this neuromuscular tone are also suspected to contribute to increased OSA severity during REM compared to NREM sleep in selected patients, in particularly women and children. So, neuromuscular responses are also influenced by pharmacological modulators of the sleep-wake cycle, like alcohol, sedatives, and hypnotics. They may decrease active responses of the upper airway occlusion and they can contribute to airway obstruction during sleep. Benzodiazepines also have been demonstrated to prolong the obstructive apneas and hypopneas. Sex differences in neuromuscular control may well be due to elevations in the circulating leptin levels in women compared to men. And with weight loss, critical pressure falls by 6.2 centimeters of water per 10 kg per meter square, decrease in BMI in apneic men, which is greater than the above noted 1.7 centimeter per centimeter water increase in the passive critical pressure per 10 kg increase in BMI attributed to weight gain. So with every 10 kg weight gain, the critical pressure rises by 1%, and if every 10 kg weight loss, the critical pressure decreases by 6.2. So this suggests that obesity may increase the upper airway collapsibility through alterations in the pharyngeal neuromuscular responses in addition to imposing increased anatomical loads. Also, circulating levels of somnogenic inflammatory chemokines, especially TNF-alpha receptor, IL-6 and IL-1 beta in association with obesity, which may account for the decreases in neuromuscular activity in obesity and OSA patients. Pharyngeal neuromuscular activity is also controlled by chemical and mechanical reflexes. Hypercapnia is also a potent stimulator of upper airway neuromuscular activity, which decreases critical pressure. Hypocapnia, on the other hand, produces a relatively passive state and is associated with elevations in critical pressure. Phasic volume feedback, which is mediated by pulmonary stretch receptors, can also inhibit upper airway neuromuscular activity and increases the critical pressure. Coming to pharyngeal sensory afferents, they can detect intraluminal negative pressure swings during airflow obstruction and they can recruit the neuromuscular activity. Similarly, mucosal inflammation may blunt these local afferents and the responses to upper airway obstruction is blunted, so leading to worsening of the obstruction during sleep. So to summarize, bony features like the mandibular size, maxillary height, pharyngeal soft tissues like the peripharyngeal deposits, tonsillar hypertrophy, and indirect mechanical influences like abdominal adiposity, which also increases the nuchal obesity. All these are passive structural loads around the collapsible segment. And neuromuscular control such as sedative drugs like alcohol, benzodiazepines blunt the neuromuscular response. Sensory afferent deficits which can occur in mucosal inflammation, leptin feedback, so decreasing leptin levels and leptin resistance, and somnogenic inflammatory chemokines like TNF-alpha, IL-6 and IL-1 beta, they all reduce the neuromuscular tone, so that also increases the obstruction. So these factors combine and predisposed to development of OSA. So what are the tests to determine this? Currently, polysomnography is the gold standard, which requires a sleepover in a laboratory, which is the optimum test for diagnosing sleep apnea. The main outcome is apnea-hypopnea index or AHI. This index represents the number of breathing stoppages or apneas and periods of reduced airflow with hypoapnea lasting greater than 10 seconds, and that results in a brief awakening or arousal or reduced oxygenation that occur per hour of sleep. So it involves the evaluation of sleep staging, airflow and ventilatory effort, arterial oxygenation saturation, and electrocardiogram, body positioning and periodic limb movements. So alternative methods to consider are evaluation using pulse oximetry and portable home monitoring of cardiopulmonary channels. So there are certain pulse oximeter also which can be used to check for OSA at home, but polysomnography is the gold standard test. So classification is mild, moderate and severe OSA. Mild OSA involves AHI index of 5 to 15. That is involuntary that means there are 5 to 15 apnea hypopnea episodes per hour. So that includes involuntary sleepiness at times of activities that demand little attention, such as watching TV or reading. So moderate OSA is a AHI of 15 to 30. That includes involuntary sleepiness during activities that need some attention, like meetings or presentations. And AHI of severe OSA is AHI of more than 30, which causes involuntary sleepiness during activities that need more attention, like talking or driving. AHI has several limitations. For example, patients with very long respiratory events may uh, experience substantial hypoxemia, but they have a relatively low AHI. So conversely, another patient may have more frequent events but much higher AHI, but there will be minimal exposure to hypoxemia. So the duration of exposure to hypoxemia is also important, but that is not considered in AHI. So the effects of hypoxia from OSA and its adverse impact on the cardiovascular system in the patient with low AHI may be more pronounced. In addition, non-apneic respiratory events that do not meet the scoring criteria for a hypoapnea are associated with heart rate changes and increased expiratory pharyngeal resistance. Furthermore, the total AHI correlates poorly with the key causes and consequences of the disease. Conversely, recent studies indicate that REM sleep apnea is more important in mediating insulin resistance and cardiovascular consequences of OSA. So these examples highlight that heterogeneity in the various clinical manifestations of OSA and its consequences and some of the limitations with currently used diagnostic methods. What are the how to management of OSA? It is non-surgical and surgical. Treatment modality should focus on potential contributing factors, whether history, physical examination, upper airway imaging. Non-surgical methods include CPAP, that is continuous positive airway pressure. CPAP is the gold standard treatment option for moderate to severe cases, and it's a better option for mild cases. CPAP provides a steady stream of pressurized air to patients through a tight fitting mask that they wear, and a CPAP of 7 to 15 centimeters of water acts as a pneumatic splint of the upper airway and prevents the passive collapse of the soft tissues during respiration while sleeping. Stimulation of mechanoreceptors of the genioglossus muscle leading to increased airway tone has also been suggested as mechanism of action. By this, it provides unobstructed. So this is the image of a CPAP. There are certain oral appliances which may be used with primary snoring, mild OSA, or in those with moderate or severe OSA who refuse or intolerant to nasal CPAPs. So these devices help to maintain an obstructed airway by repositioning of the lower jaw and stabilization of the tongue. So various oral appliances available as tongue retaining device include Clearway appliance, Hurst appliance, elastic mandibular advancement, elastomeric sleep appliance, and equalizer airway device. This is an example of a Clearway appliance. Surgical treatment methods include many surgical procedures, and over half of the patients who do not follow the problem with conservative treatment is non-compliant. So more than half of the patients do not follow the conservative treatment for a long period of time, and they do not obtain sufficient relief from their snoring with non-surgical methods, and they look for surgical modalities to correct the problem. The tracheostomy is the primary treatment modality for OSA and a temporary measure during other procedures where airway cannot be maintained through oronasal route. The tracheostomy leads to quick reduction in the sequelae of OSA and results only in very few complications. The initial methods used during surgery were upper airway reconstructive or oropharyngeal procedure. So the surgical indications for surgery include AHI of more than 20 per hour of sleep, and oxygen desaturation less than 90%, esophageal pressure more negative than minus 10 centimeters of water, cardiovascular derangements like arrhythmia, hypertension, neurobehavioral symptoms like excessive daytime somnolence, failure of the medical management, and anatomical sites of obstruction either in the nose, palate, or tongue ways. In 1993, a surgical protocol was followed for dynamic upper airway reconstruction in the treatment of OSA syndrome, which was presented by Riley and Powell. On the basis of their study in 239 cases, they had a two-phase protocol. So in phase 1, they included a conservative approach and involved only uvulopalatopharyngoplasty and or mandibular osteotomy with genioglossus advancement and hyoid myotomy and suspension. So one procedure from every area was involved along with the conservative approach. And after 6 months, a polysomnography was repeated, and the patients with unsuccessful surgical results were offered phase 2 treatment, which included maxillary mandibular advancement, that is a global airway procedure. So Powell Riley or Stanford protocol surgical procedures include phase 1 procedures like nasal surgeries, tonsillectomies, uvulopalatopharyngoplasty or uvulopalatal flap, mandibular osteotomy, vaginogloss advancement, hyoid myotomy and suspension, temperature controlled radiofrequency of the turbinates, palate, tongue or tongue base. And phase 2 includes, as we discussed, maxillomandibular advancement and temperature controlled radiofrequency of the tongue. Nasal surgeries. A painted nasal airway is essential for normal respiration, so any obstruction can increase resistance. Opening of the mouth rotates the mandible posteriorly, which in turn allows the tongue to prolapse into the posterior airway space and narrow the hypopharyngeal airway. So nasal obstruction can occur due to septal deviations, incompetent nasal walls or enlarged turbinates, and various techniques, that is septoplasty or alar grafting or turbinate reduction, exist to treat the nasal obstruction. The pillar procedure or soft palate implants. The pillar procedure is a minimally invasive approach that can relieve the habitual snoring in mild to moderate cases of sleep apnea as well. It involves the placement of 3 to 5 polyester rods into the soft palate, and each implant measures about 1.8 centimeters in length and 1.5 millimeters in diameter. The rods initiate an inflammatory response of the surrounding tissues, and that results in stiffening of the soft palate. Subsequently, the stiffer soft palate is less likely to make contact with the back wall of the pharynx, causing deep stages of sleep. During the deep stages of sleep, as the muscle relax, thereby it reduces the snoring and apnea. So this is the implantation of the rods in the soft palate. Coming to uvulopalatopharyngoplasty, it is a surgical procedure which is used to remove the excess tissue in the upper airway to widen the posterior airway space. This surgical intervention is mainly focused on the shortening of the uvula, removal of a portion of soft palate tonsils, adenoid and part of the. This is before the procedure and after the procedure images. Tongue procedure. As the tongue base is one of the most common site of obstruction in OSA, reduction of tongue mass, especially its base reduction, has been proved an effective method to control the disorder. An operation termed uvulopalatopharyngoglossoplasty or UPPGP, which included modified UPP with limited resection of the tongue base. Also, midline glossectomy is used to create an enlarged hypopharyngeal space using the carbon dioxide laser, and it has promising results. So this is procedure of midline glossectomy. So it reduces the mass of the tongue. Mandibular osteotomy with genioglossus advancement includes genioglossus. So genioglossus advancement is indicated for patients with documented hypopharyngeal obstruction. It may be used as a sole treatment or in combination with other procedures. So to conclude, management of OSA requires long-term multidisciplinary care. It should start with patient education, and they should be made aware of the consequences of untreated OSA, especially daytime sleepiness and road traffic accidents. Lifestyle and behavior modifications are indicated for most OSA patients, that include reducing weight, physical exercise, avoiding alcohol and certain medications. Mild to moderate OSA, CPAP is the initial therapy. However, patients who anticipate problems with CPAP adherence, an oral appliance can be a reasonable alternative as first line. Surgical therapy is an option for the patients in whom CPAP and oral appliances either decline or not an option, or it is ineffective. But nevertheless, patients with OSA due to surgically correctable obstruction, then surgical intervention can be the first line therapy. Thank you.